The history of U.S. debt is a tale woven intricately with the country's economic endeavors, political decisions, wars, and financial innovations. Understanding this history provides a lens through which we can comprehend America's growth, challenges, and changing fiscal priorities. The roots of the U.S. debt go back to the Revolutionary War. To fund the fight against the British Empire, the Continental Congress borrowed money, and by the war's conclusion in 1783, America was in debt to the tune of around $75 million. This period was characterized by both domestic and foreign loans, and indeed, the nation's very financial standing was in its infancy. Alexander Hamilton, the country's first Secretary of the Treasury, advocated for the federal government to assume individual state debts to bolster the nation's credit reputation. This proposition was contentious, but was eventually accepted, and it laid the foundation for the financial system we recognize today. War of 1812. Barely a few decades later, the War of 1812 against Britain caused the national debt to surge. The debt went from about $45 million in 1812 to nearly $127 million in 1815. Civil War era. This period was a significant turning point. As the nation grappled with internal strife, the debt soared from $65 million in 1860 to a staggering $2.7 billion by 1865. To fund the war, the government not only borrowed, but also introduced innovations in taxation, such as the income tax and currency, issuing the first greenback notes. Post-Civil War to century close. The latter half of the 1800s, however, witnessed periods of economic prosperity. With revenues from tariffs and excises, the U.S. managed to reduce its debt, which by the close of the century stood at approximately $1.2 billion. World War I. Global conflicts brought new financial burdens. The cost of WWI saw the debt surge from $1.2 billion in 1916 to around $25.5 billion in 1919. To rally citizen support, the government introduced Liberty Bonds. Great Depression era. The 1930s presented unparalleled economic challenges. The Great Depression resulted in massive unemployment and economic stagnation. In response, President Franklin D. Roosevelt rolled out the New Deal programs, which led to a rise in government spending and, consequently, the national debt, which by 1939 was around $40 billion. World War II, arguably the most significant global conflict of the 20th century, WW II placed immense strain on the American economy. The financial cost of the war effort was monumental. By the war's end in 1945, the national debt had surged to an unprecedented $260 billion. In the post-WW II era, the U.S. embarked on several efforts to reduce its debt. However, the advent of the Cold War meant that military spending remained high, stymieing significant debt reduction. Conflicts like the Korean War and Vietnam War added to the debt woes. Simultaneously, socio-economic programs such as President Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society initiatives also contributed. By 1980, the debt was hovering around $909 billion, and by the close of the decade in 1990, it had risen to nearly $3.2 trillion. 21st century, contemporary challenges, 2000, present. Early 2000s, the new millennium brought new challenges. The War on Terror, initiated post the 9/11 attacks, combined with significant tax cuts and the economic downturn of 2008, escalated the debt. By 2009, the debt was roughly $11.9 trillion. 2010 S. This decade was characterized by economic recovery measures, modifications in taxation, and increased domestic spending. The Affordable Care Act and other socio-economic initiatives further strained the federal budget. By the end of 2019, the debt had ballooned to approximately $22.7 trillion. 2020s. The COVID-19 pandemic has been an unprecedented global crisis. The US, in its bid to stabilize the economy, released extensive relief packages. By the end of 2021, the US debt was reported to exceed $28 trillion. The trajectory of US debt is more than just numbers. It reflects the nation's economic, political, and social journey. Every increase and decrease in this debt narrates a story of wars fought, of crises faced, of policies enacted. However, as the debt continues its upward climb, it presents challenges. The high debt-to-GDP ratio raises concerns about long-term economic health and fiscal flexibility. Interest payments, which form a significant chunk of the federal budget, could limit funding for other crucial initiatives. Nevertheless, as history has shown, the US has the resilience to navigate fiscal challenges. The key lies in astute economic policies, robust political will, and an ever-evolving financial landscape. As the nation moves forward, addressing its debt will remain a defining theme in its economic narrative.